Imagine that you have a partner or maybe partners in your practice and you all hate each other, but you need to work together anyway. Does that sound familiar to you? If it does to my guest today also, who coaches practice owners in situations like this, and she's going to give us some ideas on what to do. I'm Carl White, principal at Mark Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of Practice Care. And the mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private. Care is just better when the doctor or the provider owns the place and has the most freedom to make the clinical decisions they think is best. Unlike those who work in, say, a hospital or a health system or have owners in faraway lands, eventually, usually, their agenda starts to creep in, and that can tend to compromise your care. Let's just try to keep it all private. And today, my guest is Candice Gottlieb-Clark. As the founder of Dynamic Team Solutions, Candice and her team of experts help organizational teams and leaders across all industries to strengthen the workplace through enhanced communication, attuned leadership, and healthy conflict management. Candice is an architect of healthy human interactions in the workplace. She spent more than 20 years educating and collaborating with organizational and human resource leaders and executives. And her proven methods have helped hundreds of businesses align their teams, leaders, and culture, ultimately allowing their organizational environments to thrive. Candice holds a master's degree in counseling, is a certified mediator, and a board-certified executive coach. She's also a sought-after keynote speaker on topics including leadership, communication, conflict management, and team dynamics. A frequent blogger and writer, she's been published in numerous business and professional journals, including Business Insider and Forbes, where she serves as a contributing writer. Candice, thank you for taking some time to come on Practice Care.
Thank you. And Carl, thank you for taking so much time to read my whole bio. Oh my goodness. I hope your guests are still listening to us.
It's a good bio. What can I say? I looked at shorting. I'm like, no, that's good too. Let's leave it in. It's neat stuff. So I want to start with you where I start with just about every guest, which is to fill in a bit more, tell us a bit more about you. And I'm curious how you got into this particular area of work.
Thank you. And I would love to talk about that rather than the credentials we've already covered in great detail. So I think so many things in life, you're just, if you keep your mind open, you're going to end up where you're supposed to be. At least that's been my journey. So when I was young, still like adolescent age, I had this desire to go into the business world and be like a psychologist that helped people to get along better. And I sort of lost sight of that early in my career. I got a master's in counseling and I started doing work in a number of different areas of counseling and social work where I could make a difference. And at one point, unhappy with the work I was doing, I started looking for opportunities and found out about an opportunity. And this was in the year 2000, so 23 years ago, about an opportunity for doing mediation in the family courts. And you needed to have a counseling background. So as I looked into that and learned about mediation, I took a course in it that actually started, I think, the following Monday. And I just found it was my calling, like right away, that I had the skills, I had the disposition, and I had the passion for providing this skill, which I'd never known was something I could learn and do, that allowed me to be like that psychologist in the workplace that helps address the dysfunction. And so, that's where it started, and it's just continued to grow from there.
Okay. So dysfunction has been sort of the common thread, professional dysfunction.
Yes.
Of others.
And myself probably,
well,
but yes.
But of others.
Maybe it was the heal thyself, but yes.
Right. So partners who hate each other. When we talked about this before we got on today, I thought, oh, that's cool. I mean, not cool, but it's a cool sounding topic. So how common is this in your experience?
I have seen in interesting medical partnerships in particular, the organizations I've been brought in, it's frequently that's the issue, is those partners. And I think what I see happen a lot in businesses of any sort, but I'm going to kind of specify the medical ones we've supported, is that you have people that are incredibly competent, incredibly driven, intelligent, and they have their own ideas. And when you have people that are really like in that place, they're passionate, they're intelligent, they are not going to just say, oh, okay, let's do something your way. But they also are often so skilled in whatever's their discipline, medicine, for example, that their skills in conflict resolution and conflict management aren't really where their natural skill set, arrives.
Right.
I mean, some may have good emotional intelligence, and that's a huge part of it, but still their focus, their energy is not on like mine. Counseling and psychology is my background, and then I got into mediation. So
Mhm.
I'm really both, I think naturally talented and trained in paying attention to these things. And when you're instead putting your energies into something else, that's where you're successful
Yeah.
and very capable, but it doesn't mean you necessarily have those skills. So what people tend to do is instead of argue or create conflict, they avoid and become passive aggressive on some level, which
Hmm.
only serves to create more conflict and more friction.
Yeah.
And so I think when you have people that are very passionate, very high powered, and when they're partners or shared practice, it's sort of like being related to somebody, and yet you don't have that skill set to resolve the issue. So it just allows it to build.
Yeah. So, as you were saying that, I was thinking, all right, doctor trained as provider, is that another way of saying trained as individual contributor? Right. And now you go into a partnership and well, there's more than one contributor
Yeah.
of equal ownership or enough ownership. And now you've got to listen to somebody else. And you weren't trained, just not the skill set. Is that some of it? Like, what, I guess the ultimate question is, what creates this?
Well, it's a couple different things. So it's when you're talking about more than one person, suddenly now you have to have a collaborative energy, whether it's how to manage front office and billing and things of that nature, or if it's something more specific. Like I worked with one medical practice that had 9 partners. They each more or less had their own caseload, but they'd shift and they transfer. And a few of them had very old school belief that you can give an antibiotic for pretty much anything. And
Mm,
others in the practice were so vehemently against it. They're like, you're doing more damage.
mm,
But there was just this philosophical disagreement, but it starts to color your impression of another person when
yeah,
those happen. You're like, oh, that person's old school, or they aren't looking into current philosophies. And they're, then you start to question, are they as educated and intelligent and up to date on current practices? So as people get these opinions of each other, it just allows there to be more things creating divide, because you start digging in on those reasons and you start looking for evidence that your gut reaction now is correct. And
yes,
it builds from there.
right. And it goes backwards. You're supposed to gather evidence and then form a conclusion, which is what you're
Yes.
supposed to be doing clinically, right, with patients and medical data. But just like everybody else, sometimes they kind of flip that.
And I think that many times people think they have evidence because let's using that antibiotic prescription regimen, they're like, I know he did this or she did this
Yeah,
and it's wrong. And so it's just kind of like, I have factual evidence. They're
right.
making incorrect choices. Now, because I took the time working with this practice to ask, I learned some of the reasons behind it.
Hmm.
I didn't have to agree with those reasons, but there were rational purposes for some of these doctors to go with
Yeah,
that.
yeah. There
Anyhow,
usually are. Yeah,
yeah,
there
and
usually
I
are.
think too
Did
often
the other
it's that
partners know those reasons?
I think they did. It was enough years back, this particular example, that I can't swear that that was the case. I think
Yeah.
they just still disagreed, but rather than dialogue about it, they just formed an ironclad decision
Right.
about this person's, ability to be effective in today's
Right.
market.
And so that kind of those biases then or those perceptions bled over into the business side of practice, I imagine,
Oh, of
right?
course. It bleeds
Yeah.
over into so many things. You just form this opinion, and then when the team has to collaborate on a decision, and this is one person that's holding back, maybe for good reason, then
Yeah.
it becomes the equalization of that's because of these things.
Right.
It's
They're old school on
the
everything. They're out of date
perspective
on
is
everything.
lost.
Yes, it's true. So what do they do about this? Like, how can they, turn the ship, right the ship, whatever, move
Right.
on in a better way?
Well, I mean, it sounds trite to say this, but really the key is in communication.
Yeah.
The trouble is people think they're communicating. They think they're
Right.
thorough. I used to do
What else should I
presentations.
say? Right.
Yeah, right. I
Yeah.
used to do presentations and communication, and I'd say, who here thinks they're an awful communicator? And no one raises their hand. And
Yeah.
it's like, right, we all think we're amazing. It's just that other people aren't listening to us. We don't realize that communication is entirely a two-way street. It's not what you're saying, it's how you're also listening and
Hmm.
how you're intaking the information others are giving to you and asking appropriate questions and making sure you're not drawing assumptions. and even speaking to your disagreement, even if you do it, not even, especially to do it constructively and respectfully. You can say, I have a real beef about your decision to prescribe antibiotics in these situations. It, for me, is calling into question whether or not you're as up to date on your medical, philosophies and techniques as, as we need to be. And here are my reasons that it concerns me so much. It's not just an opinion. I hold concerns about this.
Yeah. So in that case, is that an example of a conversation you kind of brought them to have? Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when it comes to mediation and conflict resolution in general, it's the entire bandwidth of courageous conversations. Really what's happening when we're supporting organizations and partnerships with mediation, or even, as they might want to call it, facilitated dialogue, which is fine. It's really to help people say what they're reluctant to say and to give them some support in saying it. And also what we do a lot is we end up being able to sort of restructure what's said in a way that the other person can hear it better. Because sometimes a person is going to say something either in a way that's a bit confusing or in a way that can be a bit inflammatory. And when we're mediating, we're sort of that intermediary for the initial part of the conversation when friction's high, and we pull back a little bit when friction becomes low and they can start coming up with ideas of how to work together.
Right.
But when that friction is high, that's when we're able to say, okay, what I'm hearing you say is X, Y, Z, and do I have that right? And then they can reframe it. The other person doesn't have to get inflamed and having to respond to something that seemed off kilter.
Right.
And I can even press with other questions, I'm that neutral person. I'm able to look at it and say, this would really be triggering for me if I was in this other person's position because of,
right,
my understanding of humanity and that intuition and skill I carry.
right.
And so I'll ask sometimes the question I know the other person's burning to ask, doesn't know how to ask appropriately, or I don't trust they will ask it appropriately. So I'll sort of do that for them. So it allows both sides to really hear the other one without feeling like that huge risk
right.
of saying what they need to say. And funny enough, I've had a few people, when I do reframe what they're saying and verify if I have that correct, I had more than one of them say, oh, Candice, you apparently also speak Deborah, because I could reframe what Deborah was saying.
Right.
And Deborah would say that about herself when we'd work together. She goes, you can always speak my language. Thank you.
Right. Right.
So I think that's a big part of what happens is in a conflict resolution setting is people are challenged to be able to have that conversation in a thorough enough manner. They just shortchange it because it's so uncomfortable, or they don't know what to do when there is increased friction rather than decreased friction.
So how do you know when they're cured? I guess I don't know what the right word is. Cured, fixed. When you can sort of, say, I'm sort of, you got it now. What's, if you compare the before and the, because on the one hand, you're right, communication, it's a requirement. It's absolutely essential. But if you could maybe like break that down a bit, or, to some smaller, maybe more like touchable parts, because it's so big.
It is. It's tremendous, which is why it's almost laughable to say it's communication, because yes, but so is everything else.
Yeah.
I think what it really comes down to is the course of helping people to reach an understanding, like a genuine understanding, not that cursory surface level. Oh, I know why you want that, but to really be like, oh, that's why you want that.
Like,
so
what's an
it's
example?
just it's like this, got so many and now they're like flooding me all at once.
Sure. That's okay.
I want to think of one from a medical practice. So I'm trying to gravitate toward one of those.
Sure.
And there was a woman who I worked with in the same medical practice with 9 different doctors. And she had conflicts with, I think, 3 or 4 different ones where we're doing these one-on-one mediations because she's having this. And she was really, really forward-thinking, intelligent, and like able to really see things ahead of everybody else, but she didn't have the patience to get them up to speed. So she just bulldozed them and create friction and conflict. And then they would start working against her. And so it ended up being almost like an 8 against 1 at some point in the practice. I think she had 1 or 2 who were kind of her allies because they were friends, but they found her difficult, even though they were her friends. And in the end, not only did we help resolve these mediations, which I can come back to. But I was seeing, gosh, this is a trend that this particular physician has. And so I said, I want to provide you some one-on-one coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, okay. And I asked her, I said, do you see a trend in what's happening between these different mediations? And I was sure she would. I was like, how could she not? It was almost identical, like places where she had to make change.
But she didn't, did she?
She was dumbfounded. No.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, I'll tell you what I'm seeing. And what I was seeing was that she wasn't giving time to really explain herself and get their opinions and get their buy-in. She wasn't having a conversation. She, in essence, was giving a directive because she'd already figured it all out and just wanted to, here's what we need to do. Let's move forward. And she would find ways to manipulate and move forward without them sometimes because she was so certain she was right. And she was. I mean, I could always see it. And her fellow doctors, once they heard in a more calm way, they could see it. It was her process that was so bad.
Yeah.
But she didn't understand why her process was bad because she didn't recognize how she was not including them and how she was just bulldozing, as was expressed.
Yeah.
And so in that case, I can't remember the specific things that happened in the individual mediations. And I'll come back to your question in a minute, but it was just enhancing her awareness and helping her to know what skills she needed to interact in those same kinds of circumstances differently.
Yeah.
Now, for me, answering the question you asked of how do I know it's resolved,
Mm-hmm.
In most mediations, we have the opportunity to interview the different people in advance of them talking with each other, and we get a pretty good lay of the land of what's going on. Sometimes we even figure out what's the problem, but we can't just go in and say, here's what happened. Here's what you thought happened. This is the problem. Kiss and make up.
Right.
They have to get there on their own. But when we can help people get there on their own, or it even just comes up organically in the process, there's this light bulb moment of, oh, that's why this happened. And oftentimes, I mean, these are like peeling back layers of an onion. To give you an example of what I mean, and this is how small a conflict can start with, and this was an engineering firm.
Okay.
I worked for them to do a mediation between two of the top engineers, and one was like, I think did like the micro, one did the macro in what they were working on. And so they had a lot of overlap at different aspects in the role. And when they had a conflict that had been going on for 10 years before I was called in, 10 years.
Jesus.
I know it's not the only one I've seen that goes on that long, because as the organization's head, he said, well, things popcorn up and then they settle back down. And the settling back down is just people, if you give them enough time, they figure out how to put on another layer of armor around themselves. So, I mean, these two men had these huge layers of armor. By the time I was called in, it was because one of the two had not only made a complaint, but he'd complained that the other one was making problems for him because he's anti-Semitic.
Oh boy.
Turns out they're both Jewish. One of them, 10 years working together, 10 years working together. The bad blood began in the beginning. And the one who's being called anti-Semitic, of course, had never disclosed his Judaism.
Yeah.
Because he didn't like the other one.
Yeah.
And this is from the very beginning, because on day one, the guy who'd been there longer, who was the one in the end who claimed anti-Semitism, he had held the door open for the other one who went to get something out of his car after hours when the doors were locked. And the complaint was he never said thank you. And the other
on top
one
of everything
told
else,
me the same story.
How that goes to anti-Semitism.
Thank you. It was about holding a door open and whether or not the words thank you were exchanged. And that gave one of them apparently an opinion of the other one. And so he started hammering at him. You owe me an apology. You never even said thank you. You're so rude. He's like, I did say thank you. No, you didn't. Well, then they each form an opinion of each other. And 10 years down the road, we've got one claiming the other one's anti-Semitic.
Oh, now I understand. That was the entomology of the entire thing.
That was the incident that started it all. And I wouldn't have believed it possible if both men hadn't told me the exact same story.
Wow.
And these were not young men. One was maybe 10 years out from retirement, and the other man maybe 20 years out from retirement. I mean, they were seasoned in their careers.
Yeah. Jeez.
So, and it's not a foreign thing for me to see those. Now, I don't like to see mediations that are needed 10 years before I get in the door.
Yeah.
But it's not uncommon a lot of times. And this is that communication thing. We think we're doing everything right. We think we're doing everything we should.
Yeah.
And if we can't solve it ourselves, we decide it's a personality difference and write it off.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, as you were talking about the previous example with the 9 partners and the one woman who was just moving faster, I
Bulldozing.
guess, bulldozing. Yeah. I mean, I was picturing myself as one of the other partners going, look, I'm 1/9 an owner here too. You can't just do this. I don't know what the obviously specifics were, but if for no other reason, I own as much of this place as you do, and I'm saying no. You could figure it out. Like, did anything like that ever happen? Like,
Yeah, I think that was, I mean, once she'd kind of gone around them and either fired somebody or hired somebody, things like that were part of it. It was hard to undo that damage.
yeah, well, right. Yeah.
But there were things where that happened. And then the
Mhm.
managing partner would have to be the arbiter of making a
Mm.
decision, which didn't put her in good place either.
Yeah.
And yeah. And there were like I said, it created some silos and some division in this practice that weren't necessary. I mean,
Mhm.
these were all really talented and well-meaning professionals, working with like inner city population.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
you want people to be aligned and cohesive. I mean, I think that's the passion I bring to this world that's my goal. I want people to feel like they can be collaborative and cohesive. And, our motto is it's great when your employees, or maybe we can say partners in this case,
mhm.
want to come to work, but it becomes dynamic when they want to work with each other.
Yeah.
Because then it's, the sum is greater what is it? The total is greater than the sum of the parts.
Right. Right. Do you ever see situations where they're just beyond rescue? Have you ever walked in and said, you know what? You all got to just break up. It's just the
Well,
Nobel Peace Prize winners, all 5 of the last ones could not possibly figure you people out. You just need to professionally divorce and walk away.
yes and no. So I have had some clients where it took me quite a bit of time and energy to identify what was going on. I
Mhm.
can't think of even one where I walked in and thought, you're beyond help, but I can tell you a couple of things that are akin to that. I had one where after unraveling this whole mess of what was going on, I said, that person's toxic. And if you don't fire them, you're likely to get sued by several other people in your company.
Okay.
And that was their future CEO that I had them fire.
Wow.
Being groomed for CEO as I was telling them, if she is and I had to give them all the information, their attorney, I'd had to share it with the attorney, and the attorney and I were like, you must fire this person.
Wow.
So there are times where it's in that sense beyond help, because it was really a very, I want to say borderline evil individual,
Wow.
who'd found ways of really creating what looked like appropriate tactics, but they were very
So
very poor. But
how
other
does
times
that
I've had, yes, go ahead.
how does a person get that far into an organization? Were they like a recent hire, or were they there for a while? It's
She'd
like
been there for a while. She was
you
brought in as a
uncover
manager.
evilness. And if we take what you're saying
Well,
is you were the first one,
it
like,
was hard to find. I mean, this is my skill set. I would liken my ability when it comes to human interactions to be able to solve a Sudoku puzzle.
okay.
And if you look at this one as maybe one of the extreme hard ones,
Yeah.
I took some time, but it's like my brain works on it when I'm not with the client. My brain works on it when I should be when I should be sleeping, or when I should be,
Yeah. Yeah.
relaxing, and
Yeah.
doing. My brain doesn't let it go. And so eventually, it's trying all these different combinations. And then it's like all of a sudden everything suddenly makes sense, just
Got
like a
it.
Sudoku.
Yeah.
All the things line up, and there's no other way it could be a different option.
And she's
And
evil.
so, well, she was setting up her employees, literally setting them up so she could write them up, telling them to do things that were outside of the company policy. She was requesting
Wow.
it. Then she'd write them up. And after that happened a couple of times, and she'd convince them they couldn't trust HR because HR was a gossip, which HR was, but this person was really using that to her advantage by
Yeah.
gossiping with HR. And then so it looked like
Oh,
HR was so unsafe, and then firing these people for what appeared to be cause, but she'd set them up.
wow.
Yeah. I mean, like really evil. I mean, and it was just, it was I suddenly got the sense of what was going on, and I was pretty horrified. It was like one of those, I almost felt like I was having nightmares just in the moment as I
Yeah.
figured it out. Cause I was like,
Yeah.
and I didn't immediately jump on it and say, this is what has to happen. I kind of let it sit. And yeah, I kept, everything is adding up. There's no other
Yeah.
way it could go. Anyhow, so
Yeah.
there's those, but I
Yeah.
would say most of the time when it's too late, where it's just too late, isn't when I've begun working with them.
Okay.
It's when, because I was still able to do a lot of good work for that organization to restabilize and figure out what was causing the destabilization, which they
Right.
didn't know was this one person. But what I had experienced many times is when we're called for mediation, but they've let it lay for too long. They've thought, oh, we'll let it go, like that 10-year, those two individuals.
Yeah.
But when it's two partners, I had once where it was a dental practice, and it was the one time like best of friends, CEO and the founder or president. I think they gave each other sort of equal titles.
Okay.
And they'd ended up having something, no one knew what it was, that happened badly between them. And by the time there was somebody helping them find me, which was, I think, their head of HR, and this was an international dental supply company, and I spoke to each of the individuals. I was able to not persuade, but to converse with them in a way that they both thought, yes, you're the person that can help us. And the night before the mediation was due to begin, I got a call from the executive assistant from one of them saying, my boss just resigned.
Ooh.
Yeah. And I said, oh, please tell me he hasn't announced that to anyone yet. He has not announced that. I said, please let me have a phone call with him because this is salvageable. And whenever there's a personal relationship that was at the basis, those are the best ones and most easy to salvage, because it means a misunderstanding became very personal as well.
Right.
And it feels so much worse, and they just have so much pain attached to it. They really struggle
Yeah.
to mend fences. And they're the ones that have the beautiful ending where they're hugging and they can't believe they let all this time pass, where they were in anger with each other. Nevertheless, the executive assistant couldn't convince her boss to get on a phone call with me, announced it publicly the next morning, quit. And I followed up with the HR person, and they had lost, I think in the first 2 weeks, 25% of their executive team. And when I called back, maybe another month or so later, or maybe, I don't think I called back. I think it was the head of HR quit themselves and told me, we've now, including me, lost 60% of the executive team.
Wow. Over this, the root cause
Because
of which was
these
this.
two people were so important, and some were, because their conflict had grown, the team of executives was siloed to one side or the other. There'd been huge divisiveness.
Right.
So when the one people were aligned with left, as many as could left with them.
Right.
And I imagine the others immediately were looking for other opportunities.
Yeah.
And so they lost. I mean, I don't even know if that business was able to survive. I think they probably had to sell. I didn't keep up with them after that because I personally was really disappointed.
Yeah.
I was like, I could have saved this company and all these people.
Right. Yeah. Wow.
And so powerful things can happen, is what I'm saying, when they wait too long. And I actually did a micro video, like maybe a 5-minute like tips by Candice kind of video. It's on my website that talks about that, when you wait too long, and how to communicate about it. Because there's also times that whether it's partners or employees in an organization, feel like, okay, well, it feels better right now. Sort of like things have calmed down. I don't want to mediate. I don't want to do this. And what I say is, if you're going to say okay to your employees about that, you need to tell them, the very next time something happens, we are going to go to the resource we've already found. And this is being scheduled without any second thoughts on it.
Yeah.
And that way there's no, it's not like you're forgiving. You can let the issue pass, but you're letting them know, I take this seriously, and we absolutely are going to address it if it comes up again. But that way it sometimes gives the organizations a pass on not investing yet if they don't have to. And very commonly they don't want to spend the money on something, even though it's tremendous cost saving, because even if the conflict wouldn't necessarily explode into what I just described, it certainly cuts in on people's ability to be as productive, as focused, as collaborative, and all those things, which has its own cost factor.
And we didn't even which we can't, in this episode just because of the bite-sized nature of what we do. But yes, the ripple effects of conflict to the rest of the organization or the practice and the lost everything that comes from that. Hell yeah,
Precisely.
absolutely.
And in a medical practice, I mean, that can have really profound impacts on patient care and on,
Getting
just the
new patients,
continuity of care. What did you
front
say?
desk, the front desk is not
Yes.
happy and they're just short with people on the phone, and you're going to feel it.
Yes.
Absolutely. Big business impact there. Totally. So another time, Candice, we're going to have to come back,
We'll do
talk
this
about
again.
that. A couple of questions, kind of wrap up questions I ask every guest. The first one is there anything you think I should have asked you, but I just didn't think to ask you?
Well, I have a book. We didn't talk about the book. Can I bring
Let's
that
talk
up
about it.
briefly?
Yes. Do you have a book,
And I think
Candice?
this is
There's the
great
question.
for, I think this is really a fantastic book, really for people in any stage of their career. I've even had a few retirees tell me how much they loved it. My book is called Find, Fix, Fill Your Leadership Gap: What You Need to Know and No One Is Telling You. And it's based on my over 20 years, now 23 years of experience in the field of mediation and working with businesses to, there's trends that I would find, just as I noticed the trends like the Sudoku puzzle I solve in businesses. The trends I see that leaders of any level of an organization where they are struggling, and conflict management is one of the biggest ones, but it then impacts the other two of the three pillars I described, which are trust and role clarity. And those three, each on their own, are so important that if any of them is weak, the other two will not be able to be sustaining. It's a three-legged stool.
The classic three-legged stool. Yes. Cool. Okay. And the other question I ask is, so somebody's listening, they're a partner, they've got partners, and they're either hating all of them or they're on the receiving end of it, and they want to start to fix it. We've caught their attention.
Carl, on my end, you are entirely frozen. I don't know if you're able to hear and see me.
We'll pause here. You're frozen on my side, but can you hear me?
You're moving again.
Okay,
Am I
there we
moving
go.
again?
You are moving. Okay.
Okay, so we finished that question before it happened.
We did. So we had a nice break. So we'll just pregnant pause here for a second, then I'll ask the other question.
Okay.
So the other wrap-up question I ask every guest is, so we've caught somebody's attention, they're a partner, or they're in a partnership, and they're sensing the tension, and they want to do something about it, but they don't know where to start. Where would you recommend they start? Something simple to kind of kick it off.
Yeah, I would suggest just, and this is before you necessarily contact an outside provider, Dynamic Team Solutions does work with clients throughout the country and even internationally upon request, especially in areas like mediation. We can be able to do those by remote if need be. But I have on my website a wisdom tab, which has a number of different things, everything from micro videos like the one I just described to pieces I've authored that talk about conflict, talk about leadership, and talk about different things. And I think just start going through those. I offer a lot of advice. I don't make my educational pieces ones that are about selling. They're about teaching and educating. So I recommend checking those out.
Okay, perfect. And we'll make sure that we get your website into the show notes so that anybody who wants to can get to it. Well, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing this information. It's a tough topic it's tough because it's a tension-filled topic, and it's tough because it's tough to grasp, but you've really made it more tangible and I think easier to understand. And hopefully somebody who's in this situation will take those actions. Once again, Candice Gottlieb-Clark, thank you again. We're going to get all your information that you gave me into the show notes so that anyone who wants to get a hold of you can do so. A couple of points before we wrap up. First, if you are a private practice owner, you've got some experience on the business side of practice that you think others would benefit from, or if you're someone like Candice or I that seeks to serve private practice owners and you've got some expertise to share, we want you to come on Practice Care and tell the world about it. In the show notes for Candice episode and every episode, there's a link, a couple of questions. Tell us what's on your mind so we can get you scheduled as soon as possible. And finally, if you haven't done so, please subscribe to Practice Care on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, all the major platforms. We're there. New episode every week. Make sure you subscribe so that you can stay up to date. Thanks very much. And until next time.